unsurprisingly, given the audience and given the interest, first of all, I'm a little puzzled that I should be asked to talk here at all, but I will talk mostly about Medical Research Future Fund, because that's what you really all want to hear about, isn't it? Yes, right. Okay, let's not mess around with this. We know what we're here for. I was also a little surprised to hear that this was referred to as a new fund. It has been in existence now for 2 years. And that perhaps is an indication that we're not getting the word out there enough, and we certainly are of the opinion, as me as chair of the Australian Medical Research Advisory Board, that we should be doing more in that area to talk with you guys. But we are constrained a little bit by the reality that, of course, the Minister is in charge of making the announcements. So we've been around for 2 years. We know what we're here for. The Advisory Board, you've met that slide before, and you know Doug Hilton's here in the room. So anything that I say that's wrong, he can correct me, and if he and I disagree about something, then we brought Erica Knipe along, who's actually the person who drives the whole show, to make sure that we say the right things. And I acknowledge particularly her contribution to the work that the board does to advise the Minister in regard to the Medical Research Future Fund. It is important to point out that we are on track with the money, in the sense that this is the money that we've promised we're going to give out over the next few years. And when I say we, I mean we will advise the Minister about how the money should be used. There is no reason to believe that that will not happen, and every good reason to believe that it will. And while the amount of money that we gave out last year was relatively small, it will ramp up rapidly over the course of the next 5 years to a point where we're giving out as much as the NHMRC give out by the time we get to the end of that 5-year period. You collectively were involved in helping set strategy and priorities for the Medical Research Future Fund through the consultations that we did last year. I think it's important to understand that the strategy that we outlined after we met with all of you is a strategy for 5 years, and we'll not be reviewing that in the immediate future. The strategy itself is on the website. The priorities, on the other hand, were set in somewhat of a haste last year. We had basically a very short period of time to go around and consult with as many people as we could about what was thought to be important in terms of immediate priorities for use of the Medical Research Future Fund. Next year we will be going around to do another set of consultations, and I would advise you to start thinking now about, first of all, what you would like to see in those priorities in the future, and secondly, about how you collectively might want to submit on behalf of the various medical research institutes that you represent some sort of document for that work. We will obviously be consulting extensively. The one group that we did not manage to consult as effectively with as we would have liked the last time around was the general public, and since our Minister is very keen that we do that, that will be a priority for us in the coming year. I must remind you, because people still don't understand this, the Medical Research Advisory Board does not make decisions about how the Medical Research Future Funds will be used. We give advice to the Minister through setting the strategy and the priorities, and we give advice to the Minister when the Minister makes some decisions around that. But applications to individuals, well, we take blank cheques from anybody, but in terms of actually giving money out, no, I'm sorry, that's not part of our remit. So that it's important to understand that it's the government that makes decisions about these things through a process which involves not only the Minister but also Cabinet, and that the Minister and Cabinet have set a budget for the next 5 years, and you'll hear more about that in the course of the coming year. I think that the strategy and priorities, I don't want to go through in detail. I have slides with them on, but they're all on the website. They are there for you to look at. I think the most important reason for looking at them is to remind yourself about the framework of how this money might be used in the future. In other words, it's not open cheques. You make up your mind about what you'd like to see funded. It's a case of looking at the priorities and seeing how you can build applications which will meet with those priorities. So I'll skip over the strategy slides because they're rather boring, and I'm sure you'd much rather hear a little bit about how the money is being used. Now, you know that there was money given out in the context of the 2017-18 budget, and there were programmes particularly funded in relation to health and research translation, stuff for the AHRTCs, money to help with clinical trials, money to build more capacity in training the next generation of clinical researchers. And this is just a score sheet of how we've done, so I'll leave that up. It's probably a little bit small print for you to read all of it, but the Australian Preventative Health Partnership Centre was given $10 million, and that money has been given. The HRTCs have been given money and promised money, and they've been given money for projects and for national level initiatives. The clinical trials capacity has been built through the Australian Clinical Trial Alliance, has been given $5 million, and the Clinical Trial Registry Research Grants Programme open grant round, which closed in October, $13 million been announced for that. The next generation of clinical researchers, there have already been some fellowships announced, and there will be some more will be announced, $8 million for that. And then we have particular programmes which the Minister wished to see put in place for canteen and for motor neuron disease. It's $5 million and $2 million. We have contributed to the Global Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness. This is an arrangement being made at the moment, $2 million. Research grants programme to help with the question of antimicrobial resistance. There'll be an open grant round that closed in October for that. And then there's extra money for biotech through the precision medicine and 3D printing most recently announced. So that's how the money's been used to date. There are, of course, disbursements for this coming year, and I'll show you which ones have been announced, but there are going to be considerably more announced between now and the time of the May budget. And they are all consistent with the strategy and priorities that have been set. You can expect, as you have seen already, more funding to support clinical trials, more funding to support clinical research fellowships, and what the Minister likes to refer to as missions, which will be targeted to some extent for particular areas of health and medical research, but they will be, once they are out there, there will be the opportunity for you to put forward ideas which will meet with those missions, but will be your chance to say what you would really like to do within those areas. And there will be, as before, a mixture of basic translational and commercialisation focus. And basically we're trying to make the whole programme work. We want to be complementary with the NHMRC. That's always been part of the mission of MRFF, and sits on the board of the HRTC to make sure that we actually make sure that that works. So what's been announced today? The brain cancer mission, that is $10 million a year over 10 years, complementing money from many other sources to work on brain cancer. This is an area which the Minister obviously feels strongly about, and we've arranged a number of mechanisms to try and make sure that this money is well used. The MRFF contribution will be matched by the other funding partners, including Andrew Forrest's contribution, a substantial amount of money from him, and from governments, industry and private sector. And there's going to be, there has already been a roundtable discussion about how that money might be used. There will continue to be further discussions about how these programmes should be put together. There's been the specific money that was promised for biomed technologies, so particularly for 3D printing and for precision medicine, which MTP Connect will be looking after on behalf of the Medical Research Future Fund, and there'll be more of that money to come. And then most recently there's been support for clinical researchers under the Next Generation Clinical Research Programme, another $70 million over 5 years, and a whole range of fellowships announced. So that's what's actually out there at the moment. What I want to point out, and what you've probably heard in the most recently, is that the Minister has agreed and has passed through Cabinet that have also agreed to a whole set of principles about how decisions should be made about how this money should be used. Now, I've told you before that the process is going to be one of openness and transparency. And this document, which is now on the MRFF website and you can download, basically goes through the principles that will be used to ensure that that happens. One thing that's happened already is that there is now an Office of Medical Research within the Department of Health. This Office of Medical Research will be responsible for oversight of the Medical Research Future Fund, so that it is independent to some extent of the NHMRC, independent of us as the advisory board, but there to ensure that there are processes in place to give the money out. But the most important bit of this one is number 4, as far as I'm concerned, which says that the funding will be provided using a structured and contestable process. So basically it will be quality based, it will be contestable, and you'll be openly aware of what's going on. So that the rest of that is important as well, but that's the one that I would really like to point out. There are another set of principles there, another 8 there. You can read them at your leisure, you can get them off the website. But the bottom line is this is about ensuring that there is a fair process for making sure that you know what's going on, that you can apply for funding against the priorities that have been set, and that there will be a number of different mechanisms by which the money is given out, but they will be all open, transparent, contested. And that's really the most important thing that I think we can ensure from the advisory board that will be a benefit to the research community. So this is obviously important for the research, for the reputation of government, for the reputation of research. And so that is why we put these research funding principles together. And we really want to see collaboration. We want to see this as big picture, game-changing. It's not lots of little grants, it's big programs to achieve major outcomes that will be of value to the community. The Minister talks about value all the time. What is the return to the community? That value might be in terms of better health. It might be in terms of providing healthcare at a rate which is less expensive than we do at the moment, or it might be a commercial return. But the research in it will basically be valued against one of those 3 agendas. And I think that that's the important thing to understand. This is not bottom-up driven research, this is top-down against those strategies and priorities. And we will just have to emphasise once more, that's the Minister censoring what I was about to say. Yeah, okay. It says end of slideshow here, but I don't think that was it. Let's see if I can go back. That we really do need to consult with you guys about the priorities over the course of the next few months in order to develop the database that will drive the thing forward. I'm not expecting that we're going to change those priorities very much, but you may come and tell us something different. I will stress that we do not need or wish to hear that your disease is more important than every other disease, that it's underfunded in relation to every other disease, and that there are much greater breakthroughs to be made in your disease than every other disease. We've heard it all before, we know it's true, but it won't help with the process 1 inch if you go back over that ground again. So please think about it more broadly than that, and think about how the money can be used collectively, collaboratively, to make significant differences in health. And yes, of course, there will be disease focus in there, but that shouldn't be the things that we hear from you about in terms of the strategy and priorities. So I'll basically thank Erica and the Department of Health for the contributions that they've made to this. Point out that you can get more information from our website, and keep an eye on that, because that's where the announcements get made after the Minister's made them. And thanks very much for your attention.
We've got plenty of time for questions. I guess one of the things that concerns us as a constituency is what happens if the government changes. What are the procedures that are likely to occur?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, the governments will change, not necessarily at any particular time point, but there are 2 things to remember about that. First of all, the Medical Research Future Fund was approved with bipartisan support through an Act of Parliament, and the only way that that could be changed would be if somebody chose to repeal that Act of Parliament. So the core funding, the interest from which will provide the Medical Research Future Fund, will be secured through a change of government. And the actual funding going for medical research will therefore also be secured. Obviously, governments and ministers can, to some extent, influence what we may give them in the way of advice and turn it into different things. But I think that there is a programme locked in place in the forward estimates for the next few years, which will be announced. And with that locked in place in the forward estimates, it will be pretty difficult to change that too. So that most of the programmes are now, first year's funding was just 1 year's funding. Now the Cabinet have agreed to a forward estimate period for another 4 years. So I don't expect any changes anytime soon. Of course, they might get rid of our board, I mean, we are appointed at the Minister of Pleasure, and that's up to the Minister.
So I've asked the most provocative questions. Anybody else? Yes.
Alan.
Alan Fickle. Ian, thanks for that overview. Ian, it's great to see the increased funding and, as you've indicated, hopefully very, very well spent. A substantial fraction, not a majority, but a substantial fraction of the national research infrastructure actually serves the medical community. And now we're going to see a lot more medical research. And therefore my question is, to what extent will the MRFF be able to contribute to the infrastructure that supports the research that it's funding? And I apologise for the question.
I will apologise for the answer. I said that we don't intend it to be used for infrastructure because that was not the wish of the Minister. But look, I think that we acknowledge that infrastructure capacity building is part of the process, there's no doubt. But if we're funding big picture programmes, and I would stress that while nothing has been announced, the Minister is very keen on this concept of big picture missions, then into those will flow a substantial amount of money, some part of which will support infrastructure for sure. That doesn't mean it will be purchasing the infrastructure, but it will be, if you like, it will be leasing it, it will be getting access to it. And I think that the discussions that I've had with the Minister about that have been very much along the lines of, yes, we're here to fund the research, and you guys are here to fund the infrastructure that will support that. But obviously we're going to be end users and therefore purchasers of the infrastructure. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm really, what I don't want the money to be used for is, a large lump of money to buy a new synchrotron or whatever.
It does make sense, but it leaves a genuine problem out there. So as long as you and the Minister will advocate for additional support for national research infrastructure,
well, I'm certainly advocating for it, and I advocate through you apart from anybody else. Sorry, you chair the relevant committee, so as far as I'm concerned, that puts you in the hot seat. But yeah, look, you cannot double the amount of money you spend on health and medical research in this country and say, by the way, we don't need any infrastructure. That is a given. Clearly, we have to make sure that ministers and governments are aware of the fact that research these days requires more and more in the way of quite expensive, short-term, short lifespan infrastructure to remain, for Australia to remain competitive on the international scene. But I don't want at the moment to be suggesting that the primary use of the money for the Medical Research Future Fund should be to provide large capital works for either buildings or particularly expensive bits of equipment. Well, you can discuss that with the Minister and see where we get to.
I think everybody in this room, AMRI and probably Universities Australia, would be willing to support you in that contention. Any other questions? Jonathan?
Ian, I'm conscious of the focus on clinician fellowships, and I think that's fantastic. I'm also worried, though, that the more of these we provide, the more we allow the health system itself to abdicate its own responsibility to fund research within the health budget. Is there a discussion around how the MRFF funds can be used to leverage research funding for research within the health budgets?
I think you're going to see a great deal more emphasis placed on conjoint funding of exercises that the MRFF supports, particularly in relation to clinical trials, clinical research fellowships. Discussions that we had with the various state health departments last year when we were going around doing the prioritisation and strategy consultations, they made it very clear that they recognised, at least every one of the ones that I was involved in speaking to, that they needed to do more in the way of clinical research fellowships, more in the way of training their clinicians to be involved in the research scene. What we now need to do is put pressure through the various obvious channels. I mean, the Council of Australian Health Ministers would be the obvious one, to make sure that that actually happens and that they are party to the business of supporting increased numbers of clinical research fellowships so that they're actually training their next generation of clinicians to be directly involved in research. So yes, as a more general principle across the whole of the Medical Research Future Fund, there will be not only an opportunity but an expectation that there will be matching funds from outside sources and for many of the projects and programmes that are put forward.
One question. Yeah, okay.
There's also talk of leveraging from state government investment, talking about health system investment, but state government investment in terms of leveraging MRFF investment. Can you comment on that, and has there been thoughts on how that might be formally managed?
Well, look, I see these advanced health science translation centres as being key to the whole process. If we're really going to get things working on a collaborative basis, they should be helping with that. And they've been getting seed money from the Medical Research Future Fund, but it is just seed money, so that if those AHRTCs are to survive and be useful, they will have to start looking seriously to getting support from the state governments in the states that they sit. That's not an official comment from a minister or anything else. That's a personal comment from me, because I really don't see that it's the job of the MRFF to support the infrastructure, if you like, the bureaucracy that will support collaborative health research in the states. It is a research fund. It's not a service delivery fund, and it's not an administration fund. The money is very clearly earmarked in the Act for research, and to the extent that there isn't even an allocation in the Act for allowing the money to be used for money for people to run the MRFF, that has to come from elsewhere.
Ian, David.
Sorry. Ian, you mentioned the Medical Research Office within the department, and you also mentioned Erica, who I think we all acknowledge has been doing a fantastic job. Can you talk a little bit about what's planned in terms of, one person can't run this forever. Can you tell us a bit about what's planned in terms of an administration, a sort of policy unit, or, what will there be? What do you see the vision as there?
Okay, well, first of all, don't quote me publicly on this, but I did raise this issue, obviously, with Greg Hunt and Malcolm Turnbull when they were together it was about 6 weeks ago, making a little announcement about Gardasil somewhere. And there was agreement from Malcolm Turnbull that he needed to sort that issue out. In other words, that there would need to be support for the Office of Medical Research in the form of extra bodies specifically to look after the Medical Research Future Fund. Now, I'll hold him to that. He may have a few other things on his mind at the moment, just a few, but I will keep the pressure up on behalf of AMRAP to make sure that we get the necessary support for the Medical Research Future Fund administration.
David.
Thank you, David Lloyd from the Baker Institute. I think it's great that you're focusing on the academic health science centres, on the AHRTCs and CIHRs. I'm just interested in your reflections on how you'd like to see those develop, because the original idea of them was that they would be embedded in the health system. I think 6 of the 9 now, the managing partner is a group of 8 university, and by one interpretation at least, it's simply another method of the expression of the hegemony of the group of 8 over the medical fund. That at least is one interpretation. I think we all support the idea of them being embedded in and expressive of the needs of the health system. I wonder if you've got some ideas as to how, as the only funder out there for them at the moment, you have a way of making sure that happens.
Well, first of all, if they're going to survive on the funding we provide, they won't survive long. They have to have a life of their own. It has to be embedded in the health system. That has to be the priority. I think that it would be surprising if there was not input from the various local universities and research institutions that are involved with health delivery, but eventually these are health science translation centres, and they will be largely focused on clinical practice, which universities are not, and by and large I would have to say also medical research institutes are not. So I think it's very likely that the responsibility will devolve back into the various state health departments to make sure that these organisations are appropriately managed, well funded, and have a fairly clear goal about what they're trying to achieve. I think that if they don't do that, then the federal government's interest in continuing to provide any sort of support from them will fairly rapidly evaporate. and that's not a threat, and that's certainly not a comment from the Minister. But I think you've got to be realistic about it. This was seen as seed funding for these HRTCs, which were already in existence courtesy of the NHMRC, rather than a means of supporting them for their future activities.
And I think also other universities are starting to be drawn into that web. Western Sydney University is now a member of SPHERE, or other universities I know.
Yeah, look, I think involving the universities seems entirely appropriate. I just don't think they should be running them. I think they should be run out of the health departments.
I have one more, and that is, it's great to see a lot of the contestability being run through NHMRC processes. But can you give us some idea about perhaps other forms of contestability that often being raised?
Yeah, well, look, we've obviously talked as a board about that quite a bit. We don't, I mean, look, it's logical that we use the NHMRC processes for evaluation of things that they already evaluate, although they will need resources to do that too, and I'm sure Anne will be the first to agree that it's not possible to do more with no money at all. But obviously for evaluating clinical trials applications, evaluating fellowship applications, that's something the NHMRC has been doing for a long time, does very well. But for evaluating big picture programs, equivalent to cooperative research centres or centres of research excellence, there are other different structures going to be needed, I'm sure. And we've always envisaged that this would be an international process that would invite experts in from outside to evaluate programmes as they were put forward, that these would be rolled out over time. That there wouldn't be so much I can't again speak for what actually will happen, but if you ask me what I think should happen, then what I think should happen is that there should be basically no closing date for these. There should be the opportunity to put things forward as suggestions and evaluated as good teams come together, they get their act together, put a proposal in, and then see how it comes out of an evaluation process. It might even be an iterative process to make sure that you get the best possible application for a particular area. So we will have to work this out as we go forward. Yes, we are thinking about it, as I'm sure the Minister is. But no, it would not simply be a good idea to dump all of it onto the NHMRC, particularly if they weren't given any extra resources to do it.
Jonathan, probably the last question.
Ian,
This is the inevitable question about infrastructure funding. Is there any discussion about that?
No, there's no action. Sorry, what was it? What was the question? I missed the question. The infrastructure is always a problem, but I didn't actually hear the last key.
So I guess the question is there any discussion about whether or not MRFF funding is going to attract additional infrastructure funding for the institutions?
There has been no discussion about that.
you mean indirect?
Indirect funding.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, yes, and there has been no discussion about that. It's not that's not something that the MRFF will be providing. That was discussed back at the beginning when the MRFF was set up, and it was clear that that was not the intention. If there is to be money coming in that area, it will have to be negotiated through the current channels.
Thank you very much.
Great clarification. Thank you very much.